Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Chamblin, and this is session 2 of Teaching Diverse Learners. You all did a fantastic job with session 1 and with your assignments. And I know with this course, we hit the ground running. First day, first session, we got right into it. So that will serve you because as we move forward, we start off heavy. We have some light moments, and I will do my best to make the end of this course as light as possible, because I do understand that professors give you a lot of work at certain points in the semester, and for some reason it seems like all of us give you a lot of things that are heavy at the same time. I'm very sensitive to that. So I start off real heavy. I'm sure this was the one main class that you actually had to do a quiz or do an assignment or hand something in on the first day. No one else probably made you do that. So when we get towards the end, where you have a lot of assignments, this class will be super light. And so this will bring some balance to you. So that's my gift to you, to make it light when you need it to be light. Please remember that if you have questions, comments, or concerns, email me, and we also have Zoom office hours. I might offer topics during office hours if it helps you as we move forward. So today we're going to be going through chapter 2. I'm coming from the text, The Inclusive Classroom, Strategies for Effective Differentiated Instruction. And for this chapter, there is a PDF, should be a PDF in Canvas for you to take a look at if you need to revisit some of the concepts that we're talking about today. So I'm going to give you an overview of the larger, more important concepts, and then you can read through the chapter to acquaint yourself with those pieces that you feel you need to delve into a little bit more. So let's get into it. Okay, again, I'm going to constantly check. So let me check to make sure we're on the same page. Okay, good. Okay, so today we're going to talk about collaboration. And this is something that, this topic is something that you probably feel like you know a lot about, right? Because you've been a student at Molloy, you are a student you are collaborating. And why are we talking about it? As an aspiring teacher, and as an aspiring general ed teacher, your role in the process of students and students being identified as having a disability, or students coming into school already being identifying and having an IEP. There is a multitude of pieces to this puzzle. There are a lot of individuals who will be involved in the whole process. And you, as the general education teacher, you are so important. And your level of importance needs to be framed out with a very strong message, the way you communicate and how effective you are at communicating can only be one of the greatest tools to help students. Not just communicating with the student and teaching. We spend a whole lot of time teaching you how to write a lesson plan, right? A lot of time. Every methods course, you probably have written a lesson plan. That's important. Communicating with students through lesson planning. It's very important. But collaborating with the other individuals that are important, the parents, the principal, the co-teachers, the paraprofessionals, the other professionals in the building. All of those pieces are extremely important in this process. So there are a couple of things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about cooperation, effective communication, shared problem solving, planning, and finding solutions. Okay, so just want to make sure we're all good. Okay, so cooperation. So cooperation in the context in which we're talking about as a teacher, as a general education teacher, the process of working together for the same end. And in this capacity, we're talking about your role with the special education process and a student that has a disability or potentially or is suspected of having a disability. And so cooperation, we're looking at how well can we work together for the process or for the good of positive outcomes. And that usually is around making sure that if we have a student who is suspected of having a disability or a student who has a disability, that we are working together to make sure that the appropriate goals and objectives are put in place and that we work so that those goals and objectives that are on the student's IEP, we're working towards that. So it's the shared goal of the IEP where everything ends up. And so our role is then to work with that. So what if we don't have an IEP, but we are suspecting? So we're going to talk about that as well. But the shared goal and the cooperation is around the final product is that the IEP, because it is the main tool in special education that drives the instruction. So in general ed, we have report cards, which is a very important tool. The IEP is an extremely important tool in special education. So cooperation around that and the process is what we're focusing on. The other thing that is not in the textbook as far as cooperation and shared goal, which I feel is really important, is that we all need to be working around cooperation for the social, emotional welfare of students. Students with disabilities in particular, because there have been students who are experiencing school in a very different way than typical students. So if you have a student who is not perceiving language in a typical way, or seeing things in a particular way, cannot sustain attention in the same way everyone else does, their experience is going to be different. And when we're looking at K through 12, younger students through middle school, high school, they will express frustration and all types of things in various ways. And so it would behoove us to make sure that we keep the student in the loop of feeling like they belong, and that we are working with them and trying to keep their ideas about themselves intact. So what does that mean? I've worked with students who were extremely violent, but who are extremely, I'm trying to think of an appropriate word, who were very rough and very difficult, because it's always, it's better for them to be the rough, tough, bad kid than to be the stupid kid. It is great to be the class clown to mask something else that is happening. So students get reinforcement or want to be positively reinforced by their peers. They also want to appear a certain way because they don't want to They don't want people to know what their weaknesses are, especially if their weaknesses makes them feel less than. So that is extremely important for us to note, that while we want to adhere to the process and we're looking at the IEP and we're looking at those educational pieces, there is a whole person there, that there's a whole nother system of belonging and reputation and self-identification that is going on, and that we need to be aware of that at every step of the process and really protect those students and make sure that they are emotionally okay. And if they're emotionally okay and safe in our classrooms, and sometimes we have to teach them social skills because they don't know how to interact with other students. And so if we could be that buffer and help them every day and they know that Ms. Chandler's not gonna bite my head off if I make a social skills error. She's gonna kind of tell me, okay, this is not what you're supposed to do. Then they know that they could trust. And then that leads to growth. So we want to make sure that our students grow academically and socially. So we are cooperating together. Everyone should be cooperating together for these major outcomes. And as the classroom teacher, you are usually the first person that a student interacts with. They're going to interact with a special education teacher probably later on, should they have services. They will interact with service providers later on. But usually the first person that they interact with is a general education teacher. If they are in school, they're in a K through 12 system and haven't been identified. Some students are identified and then go into more restrictive environments, as we learned in the last session, but some actually stay in the general education classroom and have services come to them. So as a general education teacher, you are extremely important, and being that first person to realize that it is important for you to cooperate so that you can make sure that those goals and objectives on the IEP are worked on, and so that we make sure that our students are socially and emotionally safe in our classrooms, and that we are working towards growth, and we're looking for that growth, and we are cultivating an environment where the student can grow. Okay, so communication. Everyone thinks they know how to communicate very well. So we're gonna do a little activity, a game. Are you ready? Okay, you need to get a piece of paper. So please get a piece of paper, any piece of paper. It can have lines on it, not have lines on it. And we're gonna do a little fun activity. You have to have a pencil, a pen, a marker, something to write with. So you're going to draw with me, okay? All right, so get your paper. If you need to pause, please pause. Seriously, get a piece of paper and a pen. Don't try to do this in your head. If you're listening to me while you're driving or walking or doing or washing dishes, trying to multitask, please stop and get a piece of paper and do this exercise with me, okay? All right. So what I want you to do on your piece of paper is I want you to draw somewhat in the middle of the paper. I want you to draw a triangle. Okay? All right. Now, I want you to draw a square that overlaps the triangle in the middle of the triangle. In the triangle, at each angle, I want you to draw a small circle inside the triangle. In each angle, a small circle. Then I want you to connect the circle, connect all of the circles with a line. So connect, there should be 3 circles. Connect them with a line. At the top circle, I want you to draw all the way down to the end of the square an angle. And then from the circle on the right, I want you to draw a line, same thing, an arrow going to the end of the triangle. And then, I'm sorry, of the square. And then the other circle, go all the way to the end and then draw another arrow. At any point where the arrows cross each other, intersect, I want you to draw another circle. Got that? And then on the outside of each of the larger triangle, I want you to do a squiggly line around the triangle. Okay. You got your picture? Okay. So your picture should look like this. Put it all the way close. See that? There we go. You see it? Does your picture look like that? More than likely, your picture does not look like that. This is an activity that usually when I'm teaching face-to-face, I have students sitting back to back and they have a simple picture of a triangle, a square, and a circle. We all know how to draw it and we all know how to give directions. And so I asked the student to tell the other student what is on their picture and for them to draw it. And never, ever, ever do the pictures match. Why? Because when we communicate, although we feel like we're very effective, we have to honor that everyone has their own perspective, everyone has their own thoughts. And so when you're thinking about something and you're communicating, sometimes there are pieces, areas where we just don't see it the same way. That's because we're all unique individuals. And that's a wonderful thing. So when we are communicating, we need to keep that in mind. And there's some techniques that we should employ. And by the way, this week, extra credit is for you to take a picture of what you drew and put it on Canvas. I will make a space for it. It should be able to handle a JPEG picture. So if you could take that picture and upload it, you can upload it in a Word document. You can upload it, I think you might be able to just upload it as a JPEG or upload it in a Word document. Okay, so there are some things that we can do to make sure that we are communicating as effectively as possible. And so in the chapter, there are some active listening techniques that are recommended. And so on page 27, which you should see in your handout, I'm reading, it says, an active listener is able to restate or summarize the major points of the conversation and may do this during the course of the conversation with statements such as, so what you are telling me is, okay? So that's really important. So these techniques may be stopped. Okay, so what you're telling me is, or what I'm hearing you say, let me be clear. You're saying that. So that's very important. I was in a situation where recently with a very highly trained professional who knew everything about her area. And it was an area in human resources. She knew everything about everything, and great communicator in her opinion. I asked her a question 3 times. And 3 times she gave me an answer, the same answer. And she kept saying, I'm giving you the correct answer. Then I checked with another source. And I went back to her again and said, I'm getting from this other source, that's not the correct answer. So then she says, I know what I'm talking about. And she was upset and angry at this point because she felt like I was saying that she didn't know her job. And I said, I'm not saying that. I said, I'm asking you this question and you're giving me an answer that's not the applicable answer. And so I said it, the same thing the 4th time. And for the first time in all the conversations, she said, okay, wait a minute. So what you're asking me is, and she repeated what I said. She said, so you're asking me, and when she repeated it, I could see the light bulb go off. And she goes, oh, okay. And then she gave me the answer the other person gave. And she goes, oh, and then realized that she was not being an active listener. She just heard what she heard and she jumped to an answer. But she really wasn't listening to me. She was listening but not hearing. So just in that moment, and it's something very small, but when she repeated it back and she was like, and then she said, I see what you're saying. She said, and you and I are using a particular word that it means something different to you than it meant to me. And she said, and then when I repeated it back to you, I then understood how you were using the word and how it meant something different in the context of what you were saying. So there are these small techniques that are so important. And I know you come across this in your daily social life, and this is something that is not new to you, but it is definitely a refresher and a reminder that you should always take a moment and say, okay, so let me understand what you're saying. This is what I'm hearing. Okay, so the next tip, strategy, suggestion is that you depersonalize situations. And this is so important. I can't tell you the number of times that teachers personalize a situation, and it never, ever has a good outcome. So what does depersonalize a situation mean? So depersonalize conversations, avoid negative comments that may be offensive, and instead emphasizes a goal. For example, if a student, Lisa, has not been turning in homework assignments, a depersonalized statement is, Lisa, 7 out of the last 10 homework assignments are missing. What can we do to improve that? A negative statement that might hinder finding a solution is, Lisa, you obviously don't care enough about science to turn in your homework, right? Another example would be for Mrs. Smith, who brings her son in late every day. Mrs. Smith, Joey has missed the morning routine schedule explanations that I do at 8:30 a.m. because he has been coming to school at 8:50 every day. This late start causes him to be unsettled all day. Opposed to what I usually hear sometimes teachers saying, well, Ms. Smith, if you really cared about your son, you would make sure that he came to school on time, because he's thrown off because you can't get it together in the morning and he's walking in here late. something of that nature. So, it's how you phrase something. And when you depersonalize that and say it in a more depersonalized way, it becomes more effective. So I want to share a little clip that I think expresses this very well. So I am going to share a 3-minute clip from Abbott Elementary. So let's see if I can do this well. And let me go to new share. Okay, here we go. And I'm going to share this. Okay, I'm going to make sure that you guys are seeing what I'm seeing. Okay, looks like you're seeing it. Okay, and then I'm going to play this short clip. You might have saw this episode and this clip, but I think this does a great, it's a great example. It's a kind of a little bit far-fetched example, but it's a good example of how, as a teacher, you're going to have a lot of awkward situations where you're going to have to say things that might not be very comfortable to say. But it's how you say it, how you express it, always will make a world of difference.
And to sit. What color are you doing?
Clear?
No loitering and no clear.
Okay. Blue on one nail. Thank you. Can we talk now, please?
We could, but there isn't much more to say other than you need to talk to the parent.
Look, I understand. There just has to be another way to do this other than awkwardly talking to the parent first thing in the morning.
Well, try it this way. You could talk to your student's parent right now.
Hold on. Now, did you call her?
I did not. But when you said it was Joel, I remembered that his mother comes here every 2 weeks to get her nails done, just like I do.
Hey, Mrs. Howard.
Hello, Amber.
Aren't you my son's teacher?
Yes.
Get your nails done. Word.
Can give me something bold, something that starts a conversation.
So, Amber. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, we met already, but nice to meet you too.
So, your son Joel, you've been bringing him to school at 9. School starts at 8. Is there a reason for this?
Well, nosy. I start my shift at my job at 9:30. So it's easy for me to drop him off before that and go straight to work instead of going home or whatever.
Right.
Can I get some rhinestones that say I'm not afraid of awkward interactions?
Literally or metaphorically? Because I can do that design, it'll just be $50 extra.
Well, I hear what you're saying, Amber. Your son needs to be at school at 8. He's missing a lot of vital learning.
Word? I thought y'all just be playing with blocks and stuff.
No, this isn't daycare. By the time he comes in, we're already working on primary reading and math. He's always struggling to keep up.
Oh. I didn't know that.
Yeah, I would hate them to fall behind and have to retake the grade. Now, I don't want that, but that's as much up to you as it is up to me.
I get you. I don't want him to fall behind. He's a smart kid.
Very.
Okay. I'll bring him at 8 from now on.
It's kind of nice.
Word.
You need your nails done to sit.
Okay, so now let's go back to our slides. So give that clip some thought. Okay, so let me just double check, make sure we're on the same slide. Okay. Okay, so we should be back at the slide, right? Depersonalized situation, find common goals, right? So in that clip, what was one of the things that resonated with you? Was it that do you think about if you have to talk to a parent and it's an awkward situation or awkward information that you would have to share with them, how would you share it? Because in that clip, I think it shows it in such a phenomenal way. When I first started working not as a teacher, but as a foster care caseworker, I had to call people, and I was in the office, and I had to call them and share some general information, but in some general situations. And it was just simple phone call. But I can tell you the very first day that I had to make those phone calls and call those foster parents, it was the most, I was so anxious and so full of anxiety. And I was saying to myself, it's just a phone call, but it was so new. And I'm on the phone and I'm calling parents and I'm giving them information, and it was new and it was a little, and the information wasn't just sort of like, hey, come to a bake sale. It was loaded information. So, and no one said, okay, when you talk on the phone, this is how you should communicate with foster parents, because it's assumed that you know how to make a phone call and you know how to talk to people. You just assume it. But, it's not always easy. And there's a lot of assumptions in what we're supposed to know and not supposed to know. So it's good to have this conversation, because it will be assumed that, well, as a teacher, you should know how to talk to parents. You should know how to talk to children, and you should know how to communicate effectively with other people in the building. It's an assumption. So as you have accumulated a lot of information, you probably even took public speaking course in communications, and in your work, your student teaching. And even with student teaching, you're communicating mostly with kids and maybe your cooperating teacher and cooperating teacher. But what about everyone else that's in the building, right? There's not practicum in communicating with everyone that's in the building. It doesn't exist. So talking about it now and discussing it and thinking about it, I hope that you will take this lesson very seriously, even though it's not about some heavy topic. It's about collaboration, which again is one of the most important things that you will be doing as a teacher. Communicating effectively, you can reach a lot of great outcomes. Not communicating effectively, it will have serious consequences that you might not really want to deal with, or that you know that there's a better way. There can be a better way. So when we are communicating and we are being effective, we can brainstorm possible solutions. You might come into a conversation and you might only have like one solution. And as you're talking to the other person, you find that, oh, wow, wait, there's another side to this. So enlist them at the end of the conversation. Well, cool, let's brainstorm for possible solutions. What else how could we possibly handle this? And you will be amazed and surprised at what that person has to share, or other people that you are speaking with. And then always provide a summary statement, verbal, or if it's in a situation where it's a formal meeting, but we want to have a summary statement on what we talked about and what was the goal, right? And what we are going to do moving forward. So it's really important. Now, moving forward, this is what we're going to do to deal with this situation. Okay. Your textbook offers a strategy called LAUGH, or an acronym LAUGH, so that you should always laugh and remember that. So you listen, empathize, and communicate respect. Empathy is really important. Empathy, unlike sympathy, is where you're more feeling sorry for someone, but empathy really encourages you to really be in the footsteps of that person. You need to be in their situation or think about their situation, and then from that situation, that vantage point, then start to look at the situation, right? So empathy is a critical tool that if you haven't heard of empathy, if empathy has not been discussed in any other class, look it up and really think about, well, how can I increase empathy? I, at some point, working with emotionally behavior disordered children, at first, I couldn't understand them. Then I started to sympathize a little bit, but then working with them and really starting to see the world the way they see it and starting to empathize. Wow, what a difference in solutions, what a difference in teaching, what a difference in really getting to well, why are they lashing out at certain times? Why are they angry at certain times? And it really helped improve their life in the classroom, and it improved mine too, because I really understood what triggered them and what I should and should not do, and also not to take things personally, because I began to see the world from their perspective, and I got it, and that made me a more effective teacher, and I appreciate it because I learned so much from them. So we always want to listen, empathize, and communicate respect. Always come to a situation communicating respect. Ask questions and ask permission to take notes during a meeting. Focus on the problem or issues and summarize issues as described by the parent. This is for a parent situation, or it could be a issue that is described by another professional. Find a first step by identifying and agreeing upon appropriate procedures and how they will be implemented. So this is great. I think you should write this down or take a picture of it and keep it, because you will, as the general ed teacher, talk to parents about a lot of things. It could be something that's a level 1, always something that is a level 10. There are so many things that you may have to bring up. It's I can't even give you a multitude of examples because there's just so many of them. So keep this in mind when communicating with parents. Okay. During the referral process, and this is also a refresher of the referral process, where you as the teacher need to employ communication and collaboration and effective skills. There is a problem observed. So whether that be by the parent, by any person, by a teacher, the student is experiencing a problem, the problem is observed, and usually that becomes the first step in the referral process. There is a problem. If it's in the classroom and a teacher observes that, they may use their regular assessments that they have in class, and they look for ideas, and they use consultation, not consultation services. That's something different. They may consult with their team. So if I'm a 4th grade teacher and I see that Maggie is struggling with vocabulary to the point that is impacting her reading, I might go to the teacher that's in the classroom next door and talk to her and say, hey, Ellen, Maggie's having a real problem. We're going through Unit 5 and she's not getting it. And I don't know why she's not getting it. And so the teacher, Ellen, might say, well, did you consider this about Unit 5? There's these big jumps, and my students are having some difficulty with it too. And you might consult and talk and then find that that's the beginning and end of the problem, that you try a couple of things, you realize that that might be difficult, and the process stops there because you found solution. I always am teaching science in middle school, my science class, metrics. Every time I got to the metric system, it was a disaster. And I had all types of learners, but especially struggling learners. It was almost it was so out of their field of experience that we spent a lot of time on something that just, it was sort of like, here's a chart, just look at the chart, and not commit it to memory, because it was very difficult for them to understand it and then memorize something that didn't have much application other than a liter because of soda. Because soda is sold in liters. And I think that was the only metric measure that had any relevance. So if a student is struggling with that, or struggling with some concepts of measurement, struggling with understanding space and time, so not understanding the difference between 24 hours and 5 hours, is not adapting to that and doesn't understand that, and is, let's say, in 7th grade, that's a problem, right? So understanding what's appropriate and what's not appropriate. But you might talk to your to other teachers, you might even talk to a special education teacher, and you try something and it helps. And so it stops there. But let's say it does not. So we're still having a problem. Then we have our response to intervention, which is our pre-referral team. And so our pre-referral team might give us some information or our help, or our multi-tiered team. And then there are interventions that are implemented. And so in a lot of schools, we have interventions in general education that are already a part of the school structure. And so we might have a tier 1 or tier 2 interventions that are in the general ed class, and we might implement those. And then after implementing those, you might have a student that is, this problem is still there. And then we might move forward for a referral for special education. So in that process, you as a teacher are the anchor. You are the main communicator in all of this. And so you're communicating to the team, you're communicating to the students, you're communicating to parents. The parents are saying, so what's going on? I see that my child is struggling. What are you doing about it? So you're communicating all this information to parents, to teachers. You're going back to the team and you're communicating information. You have your, then there is assessments. So when you refer for special education, that referral is still there, but you're still doing in-class assessments. You're still assessing the student. But then there's also an assessment team that is assessing the student in different tools that deal with disability, 2 different types of assessment. But you are still communicating with that team to understand, to give them information they need. And you're still conducting assessments with the student in the classroom to see how they're doing, because things don't stop just because there's a referral. So in the referral process, after the student is referred, then we do the different assessments, individualized assessments for the student. And those assessments are usually around what we call either adaptive measures or intelligence tests. Then we do academic achievement tests. There are other tests. So if the student, let's say, we suspect there's attention deficit disorder, we might have something called a Connor scale or something that is filled out by an informant. So you as a teacher may be given a Connor scale that you have to fill out and give it back to the school psychologist. You might have the school social worker come in and observe the student, and that is a type of assessment. So there are all those assessments that are a part of the referral process on that end of special education. And then after we have all our assessments, we have a CSE meeting. So it is the Committee for Special Education. And we have that meeting where we talk about the assessments. You as the general ed teacher are a part of that committee. And here is where things is really important. I have been a chair of many committees, and you could have assessments that are almost identical. But based on what the teacher says and how the teacher explains some things and brings that information to the committee, it really does change the outcome. The way the teacher has presented that information, even to the parents, when parents come to the committee meeting, their perspective, because they add to that. And so when we brainstorm and we talk about the student, no conversation is the same. So even though you have the assessments, the outcomes are never completely identical. It's not like if the student gets these scores, then these are the services that they automatically get. That's not how it works. It's a conversation. And when the general ed teacher talks about the assessments that were given and talks about the student and talks about what they've seen and what they've tried and what they've done, and the parents that they've spoken to are at that meeting and they chime in, it changes the outcome. And I have seen teachers talk to parents, talk to the committee, and really advocate for students. And those students got the best and the most appropriate services because of the way the general education teacher presented the information. So if the student is eligible for special education services or related service, so in that meeting, when we talk about the student, usually right before the meeting or maybe right after, there are goals that are selected for the student. As a general education teacher, you will never have to do goals alone. You can always have help. You will always have help and support. And okay, so what should the students' goals be if they receive, if they're eligible for services, and then if they're eligible for services, all that information goes into what is called an IEP. We will look at an IEP, and by the end of this course, you will know what an IEP is and you will understand it, I think, with some detail. So that IEP has all of the student services on it. You might have a student who is in general education, who stays in general education, but just might get speech services, or might get occupation services, or might get physical therapy, which are pull-out services, or counseling. Those are related services. Then you might have a student where it is determined that they need to be in a self-contained special education class. For self-contained special education classes, there are different ratios. There are teacher to student ratios that are different. So usually you'll have a 15 1-to-1, where you have 15 students in the class, 1 teacher, 1 aide. You'll have a class that is 12 1-to-1, 12 students, 1 teacher, 1 aide. When the number of students in the class decreases, that is an automatic signal of the level of need. So there are some students who have needs and cannot be met with 15 students in the room. So you sometimes will see students who are in a class 9 to 1 to 2. So that might be 9 students, 1 teacher, 2 aides. So all of those configurations are in place purposefully to sort of categorize and help students. If you have students who have moderate disabilities, that are served in a self-contained class, or they might be served in a special school. So which is the next level, which you know from last week. So if the student is in a school, so your school might have 15 one-to-one, most local schools do. But wait, I forgot. Related services where there are pullouts, or what was the next that I skipped? ICT. So the next level would for the student to be in a co-taught class. So in a co-taught class, you would have a special education teacher and a general education teacher. Sometimes you have an aide. And then that's where the student will be placed into that setting, right? So they might be in a co-taught class. Then, if the needs are great, then they might be eligible or placed in self-contained or in a different school. And, you know, from last week, it could be a separate school, it could be residential if the needs are extremely, extremely severe. And there is a timeline for all of these things, which has special ed is heavy litigated because students' rights have been violated. Parents have fought for different things. Schools have fought for different things. And so there is in the legislation, in that Part 200, remember I told you about Part 200, and there's a booklet, for example, there's a booklet for parents that gives a timeline of when things should happen. So some schools adhere, we're supposed to adhere to the timelines, but sometimes things do happen. So it's important to know, for our purposes as general education teachers, that this is what the process looks like, to know that we will be communicating all through the process, and that there are timelines. And so we will still be talking to parents, because parents are going to want to know, okay, when is this program going to start? And have just a lot of questions about special education. And then we have a student who has an IEP and is receiving services. There's always an annual review. So you might be the general ed teacher in a co-taught class. And so there is an annual review where we have a meeting and we want to talk about how is the student doing with the IEP and what the things that are put in place. You still are so important in communicating in that annual review or giving information. So the communication that you have as teachers is the input, extremely important, and it's all throughout the process when the student is in your class, whether they're in your class and you're referring them and they're there, or they become a part of your class. So maybe you're a co-teacher and the student is coming from a general ed class with just one teacher, and then they come into a class with you and the special education teacher and the paraprofessional that you are working with. So speaking of that, who are the people, again, that you're communicating with? You're communicating with parents, teachers, special education teachers, the school psychologists, counselors, guidance counselors. Some schools use guidance counselors, even in elementary. Social workers, speech and language therapists, who are extremely important. If you have a student that has speech and language services, it's important to have a conversation with the speech and language therapist. Don't overlook that person and just think that they're pulling them out and it's an articulation issue. Usually it's not. Usually it's a processing of language, and speech and language therapists have so much good information. So if you have a student that has an IEP, make a friend, talk to the speech and language person, just say, hey, I see that Kara has some services and I see some goals here. You have any suggestions? Or, just having a conversation, chat. Make sure you chat, a small chat with everyone. You will get so much information that will be helpful. So establishing a rapport with the different people in the building is extremely important. The occupational therapist, physical therapist, school nurse, administrators, and you might have a paraprofessional or teaching assistant in your classroom. Some of you might be teaching assistants. So think about how the other professionals communicate with you. Think about the strengths and the weaknesses, so that when you are now the teacher, how can you take the strengths and continue with them? And how can you look at those weaknesses and strengthen them? And how can you reverse them? So in co-teaching, if you are a co-teacher, there are 5 models that you need to look for. So one is team teaching, where you have 2 teachers, and 2 teachers are teaching basically the whole group. So you have one teacher who is teaching, and then the other teacher then takes a piece and kind of jumps in. So they're teaching the whole class. So you have general ed students and special ed students in the same room, but the 2 teachers are teaching to the whole group, right? Then you have one teacher who is doing the lead, who's teaching, and the other one is walking around the room. And then you might have one teaching and one who is observing. So they're not walking around the room, they're just observing. And they're observing how the teacher is teaching, they're observing what they're saying. They may be observing students and what they're doing and charting down what students are doing. Then you have parallel teaching, where you have the the general ed students and then the special ed students separated. And you might have the general ed teacher teaching the general ed students, and then the special ed teacher, so parallel teaching, you have the general ed teacher and the special ed teacher split the students in groups, and they are teaching 2 different groups. Whereas alternate teaching is where you might have a large group and you might have a small group. So you might have the special ed teacher taking a small group to the table and teaching that particular group. So let me just take a look at where this is in your reading so that you have this. And just to double check that I gave you that correctly. Okay, so in alternative teaching, one teacher leads the larger group while the other teacher, often the special education teacher, provides additional practice or strategies to students who may require additional support. So the alternate teacher indicates that you're doing your strategic teaching in that session or in that type of model. So page 43 in the handout will have information on the co-teaching models and everything that I just said, if you want it in a written format where you can really read it and you can understand it deeply, whereas I'm giving a more broad definition. Okay, and I believe that this might be our last. Okay, I think this is the last part of what I wanted to talk to you about today and what's in the reading. So one of the important strategies in communicating with others and thinking about the paraprofessionals, especially in the classroom, the other teacher in the classroom. So you might have 3 professionals in a classroom. I have been in classes where there was a inclusion class. So you had 2 teachers. Then you had a para. And then there were 3 students in the class, and each of them had a one-to-one. There was 6 adults in a classroom. And I've seen that configuration. If you have 6 adults in a classroom with 20 kids, that's not so bad. But there are classrooms that I've gone into that had 15 kids and 7 adults. So, and when you have a one-to-one para, that can it's interesting because technically that person is assigned to that one child. So when you have 7 adults in a classroom, there could be a whole lot of problems with the 7 adults into who's doing what's whose responsibility. And so clarifying roles and responsibilities is essential. And if you're the general education teacher in a classroom, you might just be a general ed classroom teacher, and you have a student who has a one-to-one. So there might be a para in your classroom, or you might end up with 3 kids that have one-to-one. So you have 3 other adults in the classroom. So how do you manage that? How do you communicate with those individuals? So it's really important to clarify those roles. I have a teacher right now who is having a very difficult time with her co-teacher. She is the special ed teacher. Her co-teacher is a general ed teacher. And with the co-teaching model, she feels like they should be parallel teaching, and that she wants to take responsibility for the whole class, and she wants him to take the responsibility for the whole class. But he believes that this should be mostly alternate teaching, and that her role should be to just take students on the side and work with them on strategies. And he wants to teach everything, or to teach all of the content. So that is something that they have to work out with clarifying their roles and responsibilities daily on how they are going to work together. So his idea of which model to use is very different from hers. The other thing that is important, again, is to communicate effectively and be sensitive to variability. So understanding that people have different circumstances. They see things very differently. They come into school with, and I'm talking about the adults, they come to school, meaning they come to work with all types of situations that happened before they got there. So there's a lot of variability, and know that there's variability, that we're not going to always be on the same page. And that's okay. This is part of the process. So how can we, even though we have variability, how can we still collaborate effectively, right? That's the goal. Maintain positive communication. So your communication should always be positive, and try to always see the positive, be positive. And that in of itself is an important strategy, and that takes a lot of energy and a lot of focus and a lot of practice. Resolve disagreements immediately. In my opinion, that's important, because you don't want to hold grudges or feel a certain way about something. So let's say a situation happens and you feel a certain way about it. Then the next interaction, you're bringing in the past feelings into that new situation. And that over time can erode a professional relationship. And it can also change your perspective on the facts. If you feel like, if you have formed an opinion about someone and you haven't like really resolved or talked about a problem or disagreement. Like, let's get this out on the table and let's discuss this. You might have some misinformed judgments based on the fact that things weren't handled when they should have been. And then that could cause larger problems down the road. And one of the suggestions that is not in your textbook, which I think is so important, attend a PTA meeting or SEPTA meeting. PTA meeting is the General Parent Teachers Association. And in those meetings, you get to understand the parents' concerns. You get to understand more about parents. You get to see their perspective. SEPTA is the Special Education PTA. And in the Special Education Parent Teachers Association, as a general education teacher, I think you should absolutely go to one or two. They probably have them probably monthly, but you should go to at least one or two. You really get to see things from a parent perspective. And in the SEPTA meeting, there's a lot of things about special education that they discuss as far as rights and advocacy and other parts in which they're staying current on, which is a great learning opportunity for teachers, because there are things that you might not be, an advocacy conversation might not be something that you're professionally developed on at the time, but it's a conversation in SEPTA. So it's a conversation that you might need to hear, and you might need to be made aware of. So there's good things that are happening in those meetings. So I think that's a great strategy as a new teacher to attend those meetings or to drop in those meetings so that you can understand what's happening with the community as far as parent part of that community, the needs, the issues, the concerns. It's a great place to grow and learn. And I believe that that is the last slide. So for this week, let me see where we are. I do not have Canvas page. Okay, I'm gonna try to open up Canvas here. Okay. Just give me 1 second. Let's see. Okay, Canvas. Okay, let me just make sure you're seeing what I see. So let me just make sure. Share. Okay, so this session, I'm sorry, it's not session 2, it's session 3. So we are here with collaborative partnerships and procedures. This is the reading. There's a quiz. There will be that extra credit question that is in this session that you'll have an opportunity to take a look at. And there will be a video that I will post that I found a few days ago. It was 2 co-teachers who were talking about their advice, tips and strategies. They were working together for a long time and what works for them, which I think is really helpful. So collaboration, partnerships and procedures has been the topic of this session, session 3. Thank you for your attention in this session. I look forward to seeing your pictures for the extra credit, and I hope you engage in quiz 2, session 3, quiz 2 though. Engage in quiz 2 in a timely manner. And again, thank you for your participation in today's session.